Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us on this Catholic Truth podcast. We're so excited that you have joined us today, and we have a very special guest, Dr. Carol Delaney, and she's going to be talking to us about the real truth about Christopher Columbus. And this is one of those things. I mean, there's a lot of points in history that's known as revisionist history, where you have actual history, but at some point, somebody revises it to something that's actually completely erroneous, unfactual, and not true. Like with the Crusades. Many people don't understand the Crusades. Many people don't understand the Galileo controversy. Many people still say that the earth is flat. And I can remember when I was a teacher, they used to teach that, people in the Middle Ages said that the earth was flat. And I was saying, that's not true. I know one pope in the 12th century who predicted the circumference of the earth without our modern technology, and he was really close. And so, they repeat these myths over and over and over again. And just because something's repeated over and over does not mean that it's true. But today we're going to be talking about one of those revisionist history myths, and that's in regard to Christopher Columbus. And we're going to be talking about Columbus and the real truth about Columbus, because a lot of half-truths, misunderstandings, and just erroneous claims have come out against him. And in fact, a generally decent, good guy has been turned into a monster and a demon and a genocidal maniac. And so which one's true? That's what we're going to be discussing today. And to discuss that with us, we're going to be talking to Dr. Carol Delaney, who is a graduate of Boston University. She received an MTS from Harvard Divinity School and a PhD in cultural anthropology from the University of Chicago. She's a visiting professor in the Department of Religious Studies at Brown University, and she is now an emerita professor at Stanford University and a research scholar at Brown University. She's the author of several books, including her latest book, Columbus and the Quest for Jerusalem, which we will link down below in our description section of this podcast. So thank you for joining us, Dr. Delaney. We're super excited to have you on the show today.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
100%. Would you agree that Columbus is in many places now presented as a power-hungry rapist, genocidal maniac, just a mean, terrible person who really, in fact, we should not be celebrating in this country? And in fact, many people are trying, I believe President Biden recently just made his day where we celebrate Columbus Indigenous Peoples Day. And so people want to get rid of him. And would you say that's an accurate presentation of modern society? And do you think it's true?
I guess that is true what people are thinking, but they know nothing about Columbus. And I'm very concerned about things that are going on and bad things that are being said about him. And while I have no objection to an Indigenous Peoples Day, it should not be the same day as Columbus Day, and certainly not as a replacement.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. Maybe we could start by talking about who was Columbus as a person. And was he mean? Was he did he come over to the Americas to kill people? Did he want to take over everything from Spain? I mean, once he put down that Spanish flag, he claimed it all, right, for Spain. And then he just took over the indigenous people and enslaved them all immediately, right?
No, that's all ridiculous.
Oh, it's false? Oh, sorry.
Totally ridiculous. He thought he was going to sail to China. Nobody knew about the American continent in the way. And the Pope had given the other route to the Portuguese and drawn a line down the middle of the Atlantic. So he gave one side to the Portuguese. So Columbus had to go west. And nobody knew about the American continents in the way. And he was going there. He was going there to set up a trading post, as Marco Polo had done in China. He thought he was going to China, set up a trading post, the profits from which were to be used to finance a crusade to take Jerusalem back from the Muslims before the end of the world. And he had actually figured out how many years were left, and there weren't that many, according to him. And so he needed to get the profits to take Jerusalem back from the Muslims, because that's where Christ was supposed to come and in return. And the temple had to be rebuilt so people could be saved.
So
That was
he was a bit wrong and off about the the return of Christ, but it seems like he had good intentions.
yeah. Oh, yes, I think so. The more I've read by him, and there's a lot that's available for people to read, the more I came to like him as a person.
Now, before we get into the show in more detail, what are some of those things that we could read? Are there like firsthand sources where you could read about Columbus and what really happened, as opposed to what people say here or there today?
Absolutely. And I'm going to show you. Here is his diary. Can you see it?
Yes, I can. Yes.
Yeah, that's his diary, and all of his other letters and everything are published. People can see them. They can find them.
Yeah, and I've actually read in studying this. I was reading recently the diary and his journals. I mean, he extensively has journals of every day of the week almost. And you know what, Dr. Delaney, I was super surprised, I guess, and impressed by the kind of person he was when he went on his first journey. I mean, it's almost everything the opposite of what's presented today. I mean, he seemed to love the indigenous people. He seemed to want to be friends with them. He told nobody to harm them. He said he didn't want to enslave them. He said he wanted to convert them to Christianity through love and not by force. And so when I was reading these things in the journals, I'm like, where are people getting their information from?
I have no idea. I mean, either they don't know that all these things are available and they could read them. I just don't know. It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's really crazy, because he was a good person. He even learned the language, Taino, difficult language. The son of one of the chiefs became his godson and traveled with him on his other voyages. So he was very friendly with them.
Could you speak to a little bit more about that? Like what kind of a person Christopher Columbus was? If he wasn't mean and ruthless and just looking to take people over, what kind of person was he? And what do the journals, his own journals, reveal about him?
Well, I think he was a very nice person. I would have liked to have known him. He seemed to be very friendly with them. He thought they were the best people in the world. And he instructed his men not to do anything bad to them. And really tried, to protect the native people against some of the marauding that his men were doing. And sometimes that was a little difficult because the men were sort of raping and doing horrible things. Columbus did none of that.
Yeah, it's interesting that his own men, it's interesting that Columbus seems like a really good guy, but his men, a lot of the men that came with him, especially a few in particular, really weren't that nice. And in fact, they ended up turning on Columbus. I know we'll come back to this at a later point in the show, but they ended up arresting him and just wanting to get him out of the way because he was a problem. He was always saying, no, don't do this. No, don't do that. No, treat them nicely. And they didn't like that, did they?
Right. You're absolutely right. That is what happened.
So when he came over, actually, one of the things that struck me the most is that Columbus said of these people, and people can read this, you guys can read this in his own journals, but he said this is maybe the best people on the face of the earth. He said they were the nicest, kindest, most peaceful people. He said they seemed like Christians without knowing Christ. And he said they were more peaceful than anyone he's ever met. And he really had a liking for these indigenous people. And not all of them, of course. There were many indigenous tribes, I believe they were called the Carib, for example, who were not nice, who were barbarians in a sense. And they used to capture the nice tribes and capture them and enslave them and castrate them. And even they were cannibals. I mean, there were reports of many cannibal tribes. So yeah, there were parts of indigenous tribes that weren't good and that people did come in combat with, but there were many, many more nice tribes on many different islands that Columbus talks about. And
he didn't meet those bad ones until later.
Yeah.
I don't think he met the bad ones on the first voyage.
Okay. And what are some of the things that the good ones, when they first met Columbus, when he first arrived, in the Americas, how did they greet him?
I think they must have been very surprised because they were all they were naked as their mothers wore them, as Columbus said, but these men were totally overdressed. And they also had beards, and the natives had no facial hair whatsoever. And so it must have been very shocking to them.
But, I was thinking, like, imagine you're naked. All you pretty much know is naked. And then you see And he said they were so simple that they didn't even know like what a weapon was, this particular tribe, because when they handed him a sword, they grabbed the sword by the wrong ends and cut themselves. So Columbus is like, I could take over this entire people with 50 men because they don't know anything about warfare. And 3 of our men scare an entire tribe. He's like, but that's why I like these people, because they're so nice and they don't mean us any harm. And what's really struck me, Dr. Delaney, was that as soon as the boats arrived, they ran to the boats. They thought they came from heaven. I mean, can you imagine you've never seen technology in your life and you see these massive boats show up on your, okay, the gods have come to visit me. And Columbus said that they thought they were from heaven, or they thought they were gods of some sort. And so, they would bring them all these treasures and bring them, their cotton and stuff. And what struck me is that Columbus instructed his men not to take anything without repaying them in like kind. I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And he continually, because they went marauding. He couldn't control all of the men, but they saw these naked women. They went and grabbed them and stuff. And Columbus was furious. Mm-hmm. And they also took food and other kinds of things. And the natives were very friendly and were already helping them. Yeah. So they didn't need to go marauding, but that's what they did.
Yeah. So when I was reading this, that's what struck me too, is they had good relationships with the Native Americans for quite a while. They were trading, they were eating together. Right. Columbus even rescued them from being kidnapped by the Caribs. He went and rescued them. Right. So they had good relationships. And later on, some of his men started acting poorly against his orders. And I heard somewhere, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't he execute a few of his men because they were mistreating the Native Americans?
I think he did. I think he hung a couple of them. Yes.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. But for someone who was supposed to just wanting to take over everyone, why would he kill his own men for going against his orders and harming the indigenous people?
Exactly. People just really know nothing about him and should read his diary. As I said, it's published. It's easy to get hold of. And I think a very different opinion about him when you actually read his own words.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he also, as I said, he learned the language, Taino, which was not easy. And he said he would have members of his household also learn the language so they could communicate better.
Yeah. Some people will say that, he kidnapped 6 men and he sent them back to Spain in order to make them Christians, so this proves that, he was already kidnapping and enslaving people because he sent them back to Spain as slaves. Is that true?
Absolutely not. When he returned, the Santa Maria went aground on the first voyage. And so he knew that he had to go back and get another one. And so when he returned, he took 39, I think it was 39 natives with him. He said more wanted to go. None of them were enslaved. One of them became his godson, as I think I mentioned. They were all taken and baptized in Spain. Some of them decided to remain. And only a few of them decided to return back with him. And as I said, one became his adopted godson.
So interesting. One became an adopted grandson. Like that just shows how much he actually liked these people, like how much he fell in love with them, doesn't it?
Whether it was a grandson or a godson, I think it might have been more a godson. But anyway.
I think it was a godson, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. And he traveled around with him.
And that's what most people don't understand, is that they say he kidnapped them. I think because he used the word servant, but it's not in the same way that we were using the word slave today. No. But the point is, like, it was so easy to disprove because he in his own diary said so many more indigenous people wanted to come with me, but we didn't have room to take them. They were like begging him to go and he couldn't take them all.
Right. No, they were friends. They remained friends.
So interesting. And so later on, and I don't understand how he could, just come over here, rape them all, take them over. And then he wasn't even there half the time. He was bouncing from island to island and sailing a lot of the time. And he specifically said in his own diary that there's no need to set up any forts here. There's no need to take precautions of defense because these people are so peaceful. We don't need to defend ourselves against them. We can coexist with them.
Right. Absolutely.
To me, that's telling.
Yep. um, because of and because of well, we haven't gotten there yet. But when he returned again, he had to go back to get the rescue ship. When he returned, they saw that there were 39 men. The 39 men that he had left were dead on the beach.
The Spanish men?
Yeah. And so the people that were with him said, "Oh, we've got to go and kill all the natives." And Columbus said, "Absolutely not." And he learned, that his men had done horrible things, and that's why they were killed.
So when he went back to Spain, that's kind of when the marauding and raping started, and they went, I guess, against his orders. Because I remember reading his journals, and he left express directions not to do any harm, not to take or steal anything without giving them something in return.
Because they had been so generous and were kind.
Yeah.
He assumed, of course, they would remain that way, and they did. But then the men just started.
But his own men didn't.
No, exactly.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
So interesting. It's almost like the Christians acted worse than the pagans.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. The natives were very friendly and generous. And then the men, Columbus's men, went marauding and raping and doing awful things.
And I know it wasn't like all his men who were like that. I know it was a few leaders who were instigating everybody else to do it, or they were just doing it themselves. But I remember Columbus, I think if I remember correctly, reading from his journals, he was lamenting the fact that his men, even especially in the second voyage, were starting to rebel against him and his wishes, and they weren't even listening to him anymore. And could you speak a little bit more to that?
I probably don't know that much about that, but they just took things into their own hands. And I don't know if you realize, but in response to all the bad things that his men had done, he became a lay Franciscan monk. And he wore the robes for the rest of his life. Columbus the monk. Who knows about that?
Because you're saying he felt guilty about everything that happened to the indigenous people. So he kind of made a pact with God to become a religious monk.
Yes. Well, and in response to the horrible things that his men had done, particularly.
Yeah. Did he do anything to his men? He came back and they were dead. So I guess it was just punishment. But were the second batch of men who wanted to kill all the indigenous people, and Columbus told them no, not to, don't lay any hands. Did they listen to Columbus? Like, what happened after that?
It was very difficult, I think, because there were a lot more men for him to try and control. But
you know how many by chance?
I don't.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if my number's right, but the number in my head is, I think instead of sending 3 ships with a handful of men, I think they sent something like
17.
It could be wrong. People can look it up, but I think it was like something like 36 ships or 49 ships with like 1,300 men or 1,700 men, well over 1,000 men. So this was a clear difference.
I thought it was 17 ships.
17 ships. Okay.
That's 17 ships
with over 1,000 men. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Interesting.
And he was, he could control all of them.
And is it true that he wanted all those men because they wanted to find the gold, right? I think you said that at the beginning, they wanted to find gold in order to help finance the Crusades. That was like his primary goal of going there.
It was, like Marco Polo had gone to China, and Columbus thought that's where he was, or at least at the beginning, and to find the gold mine. And he never intended to use the natives as miners. He expected the men to be the miners. But obviously they never found the gold mines.
Did they find any gold?
I'm not sure about that. I don't think so, but I can't remember.
Okay. So they were sent back to mine for gold, to help them find for gold, to set up some colonies. And I remember I thought something was interesting. I read a historian recently who said that, when Columbus put the Spanish flag down in the Americas, some people would say that it was to assert Spain's dominance, to enslave everybody and make everyone part of Spain. But in fact, this historian and other historians have said that actually he was just setting up a trade route as opposed to Portugal. Now, Portugal couldn't use this as a trading post because it was under Spanish claim, whereas Spanish couldn't use Portugal trade routes. And so they weren't trying to enslave the people necessarily.
Not at all.
Trying to create trade routes like Marco Polo, you said. I thought that was very an interesting point you made.
And he thought, he was at the periphery of China, as Marco Polo had gone and set up trading posts in China. So Columbus thought, oh, I'll go this way. And so he really thought, for at least for a long while, that he was probably at the periphery of China, and that he was going to set up a trading post.
So interesting that, something with such good intentions just kind of went awry. And I mean, I guess men who can't control themselves see all these naked women and can't keep it in their pants, per se, so to speak. And even though Columbus keeps them tame for a while, as soon as he leaves, it's like as soon as your parents walk out of the room, you go to the cookie jar that you're not supposed to have, and as soon as Columbus leaves to go back to Spain, his men do literally everything he tells them not to do. And I think it speaks to Columbus's character that he came back and all his men were dead, and he defends the Indians. He defends the Native American people, and not he didn't want them killed. Right.
That's absolutely right. And of course, the men with him wanted to go marauding too, but he said, absolutely not. Absolutely not. It was difficult for him to keep all those men, under his control.
Yeah. Yeah, some assert that he wasn't a very good leader or like administrator. He was a sailor and explorer, but he wasn't a very good leader.
I think that's probably true. And then on one of the voyages, he was marooned with his son Ferdinand. They were marooned for 1.5 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
But so a lot of things can get out. A lot of things can get out of hand after 1.5 years. And if they were like almost out of hand with him guiding them and instructing them and commanding them, what are they going to do without him for 1.5 years? Now, is that what led, do you think? I think because they, correct me if I'm wrong, but they even eventually got sick of Columbus and him telling them what to do. So they turned on him and got him arrested, right? And they sent him back to Spain.
They did. They put him in chains, I think, and sent him back.
Yeah.
But he was released by Isabella.
Yeah, he was exonerated because, I mean, he talks about in his diaries how his men turned against him and how they're really evil men. And they're doing, I mean, one whole ship went exploring and doing stuff that he said not to do, and they went against his direct orders. So it seemed like he couldn't control a lot of his people there.
I think that's absolutely right. And he went back several more times. He made 4 voyages.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems to me, I don't know if you know this, but it seems to me that later on in life, this is kind of what I get from reading historians and reading his own works, but he started to go, I won't say crazy, but kind of sort of, because he had traveled so much. He had become so sick on so many voyages, almost to the point of death, that he almost didn't have his full faculties with him by the, end of the 3rd journey and the 4th journey. And yeah, he was surviving, but, I think he permitted and allowed a lot of things to happen to the indigenous people, perhaps, that he probably would not have done in his right mind if he wasn't so sick, if he was capable, if he was able, and if he was there like most of the time, but he wasn't there most of the time. So he's like, I don't know what to do with these people. I can't control them.
Right. Yeah. I don't know about the sick business. I'll have to reread my book, I guess. And I should have done that before this interview, but yeah, I don't remember him being sick, but it was impossible for him to control the man. That's true.
Yeah.
And they did all those. They were the ones who did these horrible things against his explicit orders.
Yeah. So it is true that some bad things happened to the Native American people, but it wasn't Columbus per se. So in a sense, yeah, there are villains and there are evil people, but Columbus was not one of those people. Is that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely correct. Because he kept trying to control them and tell them not to do this, not to do that. But he couldn't control all those men.
Yeah.
And, no, I came away from all the research I did thinking he was a very good man. I liked him.
I did too, actually. Yeah, very much so. And he wasn't perfect, and he certainly made some mistakes like everyone on Earth. I mean, he wasn't a saint, but he also wasn't a villain. All the people with him were villains, which is probably why they arrested him.
And as I said, he became a lay Franciscan monk.
Yeah.
And nobody knows that either. And that was in remorse, basically, for the horrible things that all his men had done against
Yeah.
his.
Yeah. And it really, I would really like to encourage people to at least read his journals. I mean, it struck me that
Yes,
he's like,
absolutely.
we could take over these people in a heartbeat. I could take over this whole tribe with 3 men. But he's like, but what struck me is that he wanted to bring them all to Christianity,
Right.
but he specifically said that he didn't want it to be by force. He wanted it to be through love. That's the words he used, through love.
Right, right.
And so he would preach to them and he would teach them, because he said that they already seemed to know God without knowing God. And since he said they had no religion, so they're very like, it's like a blank book, we could just teach them. And in fact, in his first voyage, I remember reading this in his journal, he said they're very open to our religion. They're accepting it almost right away when we teach it to them, and they love what we teach and they want to hear more about it. And so it's interesting that it just seems like the total opposite of what people say, that he went over there, just converted them all, enslaved them all, killed them all.
He kept requesting from the Spanish sovereigns to send over more priests to baptize, to teach them. He wanted more priests to come. He kept asking for more of them to come over so that they could teach the natives, not just baptize them without them knowing anything about it. He really wanted them to know. And the only way that could happen would be to have more priests there to come and teach.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know why. And the monarchs were not acquiescing his requests, were they? I mean, because he wanted more miners. And I think this is one of the problematic aspects is but he wanted miners to mine for the gold because he didn't want the Indians to do it.
Absolutely.
But what happened with that?
I don't think they ever sent them, or if they did, it was too late or very late. And, the guys who were there continued to do those things.
And the guys who were there with him, that you said earlier that they didn't want to do the mining, right? They refused to do the work they were sent over to do.
Right. Right. They thought they could get the natives to do all that stuff for them.
Yeah, and I remember them complaining about Columbus. I think they had good intentions. They wanted to search for gold. They probably would have mined, but they started complaining that, the journey's so long. Oh, I don't feel good. Oh, I'm tired. We don't have enough food. And I remember in Columbus's journeys, they sounded like the Jewish people. They complained about everything. Where the Jewish people complained against Moses, these people constantly complained against Columbus so much that he thought they were going to mutiny, but they didn't. But, he was scared that they might.
Well, and then other people were sent over with the second and third voyages to help control, or, at least administer the whole area, so that it wasn't just under his administration then.
Yeah, and he ended up getting kind of booted from that administration because the people kind of got rid of him because they didn't like him.
Right.
Now, when he eventually, at some point, I'm not sure when, but the indigenous people were put in the mines, right? Or I should say they were made to dig for gold. I don't know if they were made to, or if they were asked to, or if they were employed to, but if I remember correctly, I believe that Columbus wanted them to be paid, right? They didn't want them to work for free, and they wanted them to be treated with kindness and love, right?
They were supposed to be, treated like members of the crown should be paying them. That's what I remember reading in the diary, and his request that they be paid.
Okay.
If they were going to work in the mines. They were not forced. According to him, they were not to be forced. But if the other men forced them, he couldn't necessarily control them all. But he wanted the natives, if they were to work, they were to be paid by the crown.
Yeah, and that's a fine line because, Columbus is there, they're working, they may, be getting paid. He's treating them right. I even remember from letters, not only from Columbus, but I believe from Spain, saying that we need to treat them as family. Don't bring any harm to them. We need to treat them with respect, that sort of thing. But, okay. So, but at some point, Columbus is going to go explore again, and he's gone for a year and a half, marooned on an island, or he's, hopping from island to island and exploring. And with him gone, anything can happen. Okay, other people take over, and how are they going to treat the indigenous people? So I think this goes back to what we were saying before, that Columbus seems to have been a very good guy, had good intentions.
Oh,
But a lot
absolutely.
of the people who he was with, especially some of the leaders that Spain unfortunately sent, were not nice people and not even nice to Columbus.
Well, they probably didn't even agree with the reason for the whole voyage, which the gold that they were supposed to find was to be used to finance, this crusade to take Jerusalem from the Muslims. They
Right.
probably could have cared less.
No,
They
they
just
probably wanted it for themselves.
wanted for themselves. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Columbus learned the language, I think I told you, and the son of one of the chiefs became his godson, traveled with him on the other voyages, and went back to Spain on the first one with him, and then returned.
So he had some Indians traveling with him on his voyages and helping them. And one thing that struck me is I remember he came across this one tribe, and I don't remember what tribe it was, but it was after the Carib, I believe.
Oh.
And one had a big gold plate on hanging from his neck. And Columbus wanted it because he wanted to use it to show other leaders of tribes to see, hey, because he used to try to sign, where can I find more of this? But he said the guy wouldn't give it up. He didn't want to depart. I mean, the Indians were willing to depart with almost anything as long as they got something in return. But this guy said he wouldn't depart with it. And Columbus is like, okay, fine, that's cool. And he didn't take it from him. He didn't, throw him on the ground and rip it off his neck. He said, okay, you can have it.
Right. Yeah.
That just strikes me as the type of person Columbus is. He was really kind to them.
He was. I came to like him reading through all his letters and his journals and so forth. I came to like him.
Yeah, me too. And
he became a monk.
What's that?
And as I said, he became a monk.
Yeah, he did become a monk.
Sort of in remorse for what all of the men had done. And at some point, he stayed at this monastery in Spain called La Rábida. And I've been there. And they've reserved several of their rooms where Columbus has stayed exactly as they were at the time. I don't remember anything in particular from
Yeah.
Sorry
so I think it's fair to say that, later in life, especially I remember Columbus got really sick and he wasn't feeling well, but really he was overwhelmed by his men. And I think that led to some compromises. He kind of maybe just let them do their thing because he didn't know what to do or how to control them. And so I do think some abuses happened. I do think some bad things happened, but I wouldn't say that he was the architect. I think it's a false display of history to say that he was the architect of it all. That's what he wanted. See, people aren't demonizing. We're not saying don't demonize some of the bad things that happen, because some of the bad things that happen are worth demonizing. What we're saying is Columbus is not the architect of these things. And in fact, he was against these things. And he was even demonized for what his thoughts were.
And he punished a lot of his men who were doing those things. But he was one man.
Right.
And it was very difficult to control all of these rapacious men.
Men who were very power hungry, greedy. I mean, they were continually trying to take things from the Indians without repaying them. And Columbus scolded them constantly for that. And so it's like I guess they probably felt like he was their daddy or something.
Well, he wanted to set up a trading post. It wasn't to go and just grab stuff. It was to set up a trading post.
Yeah.
And that actually never happened.
Yeah. So sad how it all transpired, what he wanted to happen. And is it accurate to say that Columbus founded America? I mean, in some ways, he didn't find America because people were already there, but the people on one side of the ocean and the other side of the ocean didn't know each other existed. Right. So in some sense, it seems like he founded America, like for the rest of the world. Would that be accurate?
Except that he landed in Hispaniola. He never landed on the American continent. No.
Hispaniola meaning what country? Like South America?
No, it's an island in the Caribbean.
Okay. Did he ever get to any American countries, South America, Middle America, any of that?
He sailed along the north coast of South America and probably got off and, went over there just to look around. But that's all.
Okay.
That's all.
And so he saw a lot of the islands like Puerto Rico and things like that, or just other in general islands.
he sailed around them. He really didn't land on many of them.
Okay.
At least as far as I could read.
He's trying to find his path over to China, which he was
China.
wrong about. Yeah, he was very wrong about the coming of Christ, and he was very wrong about his trade routes. But he did have good intentions, and he did, have a lot of discoveries and things that he found that no one else found before him.
And also, learned the language, became friends with them. Adopted one of the sons of one of the chiefs. So I came across, having read his diaries and his letters and all that stuff, I came across really liking him.
Yeah. No, I did too, overall, for sure. Absolutely. And again, people can check out your book, Columbus and the Quest for Jerusalem.
Huh? Or read his diary.
Or read his diary. Yeah, both. Absolutely. And in fact, you can read diaries for all 4 of his trips. And there are many historians who talk about this as well. And there's a lot of misinformation as well, which seems to contradict his diaries, which is very interesting. I don't know where they get that information from. I know there's some other people like Las Casas and some other troublemakers who were writing. And I think Las Casas, if I'm not mistaken, had 2 journals, his journal and then his pretend journal, which he would show the men. And somehow it got confused. But there are other sources out there, and people can, read it for themselves and make up their minds. But, I personally think that Columbus was a good guy. He had good intentions. He was not perfect. Nobody is. He probably made some mistakes like everyone would, but he was a good guy overall. He doesn't deserve to be demonized.
I totally agree with you. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this show today. We really appreciate having you.
Thank you very much. And I hope people will read his diary, read my book if they want, which has lots of references to other things besides the diary that Columbus wrote. So
his other writings. Perfect.
I think he was a good guy, and he remained friends with the native chief, Guacanagari.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, he did.
He had that godson who traveled with him too.
Well, yeah. And I want to thank our listeners too for tuning in for this show, and just watching this podcast and, hearing this other side, which isn't too popular today. I mean, back in the day it was popular, but nowadays not so popular. And, but people are crazy today. I mean, at least here in America, people have literally gone off their rockers. They're accusing everyone of racism, which is racist itself. And they're tearing down all these statues, which have nothing to do with racism. I remember they chose... Oh, totally. They took down a statue of Saint Malachi. I believe it was Cortez who took down a statue of Saint Malachi for being a white supremacist, when in fact he was ministering to the people, serving them, loving them, and giving his whole entire life to their service. And he's being accused of being a white supremacist. This is how unintellectual and ridiculous many people in our country have become. They're I don't want to use the word stupid, but really it's not intellectual. And this is intellectualism used to be up here, and now it's in many places.
They need to do some reading and research, but also I agree with you. I've been totally upset by the destruction of and defacing of all the Columbus statues. They're being moved, they're being beheaded. I mean, they know nothing. Yeah. And I was in Boston where I saw one that had been beheaded and another one that had been moved. It was very, very disturbing to me.
You know what? Ignorance is key in this country. Ignorance and emotion and strong opinions based on nothing but my own opinions, no facts, no evidence, no sources.
In first and second grade, you wonder what they're teaching about Columbus. I think that would be a really good thing to maybe that's something I need to look into. The teachers are teaching about Columbus, because
I can already tell you that the schools have been hijacked by a lot of liberal education, and they're teaching an agenda rather than teaching kids, history, actual history, or that there are 2 sides of history and you need to look deeper to find out the truth. They just give their own personal preconceived political bias of an opinion and say that's what you need to believe. And from teaching in schools, I saw it all the time.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is terrible.
all the time. And just as one example, this has nothing to do with this show, but I'm on a rant now. So I remember I was substitute teaching for this class where one guy wanted to give a personal opinion blog. So they had to read a 3-page paper on gun control and then give their opinion on whether they thought that, guns should be legal or not in this country. And they had to write a 1-page paper on their informed opinion. But the only problem is, the 3-page paper they had to read only showed why guns were bad, all the people they killed, numbers and everything else. And it did not give the other side. And so I was like, your teacher's clearly biased. He's not teaching you to be educated, and he's not teaching you to be intellectuals. He's teaching you to be political. And this is not to his credit. And you can tell him I said that. I said, so I'm going to give you the other side. And I'm not even taking the other side. I'm not even taking a side. I'm just saying that there is another side. So I gave them the facts about how guns have helped people, how guns have defended people. A woman with 2 kids was able to fend off 2 men and save her 2 children. And I gave all these different possible cases. And I said, you decide and you write your own essay now that you know both sides. So to me, I feel like so many people are only presenting what they want people to know rather than what history presents us. And that is so,
they don't know
so
anything.
sad.
That's part of the problem. They don't know a whole lot about Columbus. And I'd sort of like to know how he's being taught in schools. And maybe that's where they've been getting wrong ideas.
Yeah,
perhaps
absolutely.
Teachers who are teaching don't know anything about Columbus either.
It's true. It's true. Or the Crusades or many other things that I have to correct teachers on when I was a teacher because they haven't actually studied. They just repeat myths and they haven't read firsthand sources, eyewitness accounts, or anything else. So again, thank you, Dr. Lady, for helping clear this up for us and, shedding some light on the topic.
Thank you very much for having me on. Good luck.
Thank you. And thank you all for watching. Keep praying for us. We're always praying for you. God bless you.